Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Web3 Daily. Today, the market has been nothing short of surreal. Over in the US, the government has officially shut down because they couldn't agree on a budget. And just like that, Wall Street is flying blind. They can't even get their hands on key economic data like the jobs report. They're completely lost. So where did the money go? You guessed it. It flooded right into our crypto market. Bitcoin went on absolute tear, blasting past $119,000, even touching a high of $119,455, a peak we haven't seen in over 2 months. Ethereum wasn't just sitting on the sidelines either, reclaiming its spot above $4,300. The whole market was green, and trading volume exploded by over 137%. What does that tell you? It means a ton of hot money is pouring in. The fear and greed index also snapped back from fear right into the neutral zone at 49, so sentiment has clearly improved. So, the core driver for today's rally wasn't some new tech breakthrough in our space. It was purely a macro play. The outside world is in chaos, and investors are treating Bitcoin as digital gold to hedge their risk. But there's a pretty big irony in all this, which we'll dive into later in our news segment. Okay, let's dive into a topic today that's really interesting, maybe even a little heretical. A stablecoin giant Circle, the company behind the USDC, is considering adding a reversible transaction feature. Basically, it's like the chargebacks you get with traditional bank cards. When I first saw this news, my immediate thought was, aren't they just trying to drag Web3 back down the old Web2 path? And sure enough, the moment this idea dropped, it set off a firestorm in the core Web3 communities on Reddit, sparking a huge debate about the very soul of Web3. Now, the people on the pro side have a pretty simple argument. It's all about safety and convenience. Think about it. How many people have lost their assets in a flash just because they mismanaged their private keys or clicked a bad link with absolutely no recourse? Irreversibility sounds cool, but for the average user, it's a minefield. So they argue that if USDC could be recovered after being stolen, just like a credit card, wouldn't that encourage more people from outside the crypto world to actually use it? They say it as a necessary step for the mass adoption of Web3. Some even say that while the base layer, like Ethereum, must remain immutable, an application layer token like USDC, which is meant to mimic the dollar, can have more flexible rules. But on the other side, the Web3 OGs and core developers are absolutely furious. They believe the core value of the blockchain is its immutability. If you can reverse transactions, the entire foundation of trust just crumbles. Even worse, this would grant Circle an immense amount of centralized power. It would no longer be just a stablecoin issuer. It would become a judge, unilaterally deciding whether a transaction is valid. There was a comment in the community that just nailed it. Bankers will be bankers, and from a technical standpoint, this is a disaster for current DeFi protocols. Imagine this, someone steals USDC and swaps it for Ethereum on Uniswap. Then, Circle forcibly pulls that USDC out of the liquidity pool. What happens to the LPs who provided liquidity? They're left holding the bag. The entire DeFi Lego structure could suffer a chain collapse just from this one loose brick. So you see, this is no longer a simple feature update. It's a battle over the future direction of the industry. Is the future of Web3 about sticking to the pure ideals of decentralization, even if it remains a niche? Or is it about compromising with the security models of traditional finance to onboard billions of users? My guess is that Circle's move has deeper regulatory motives. A stablecoin that can be controlled by regulators is obviously more palatable to governments. If this actually happens, the stablecoin market could split into two camps. On one side, centralized stablecoins like USDC, which will behave more and more like bank accounts, and on the other, decentralized native stablecoins like DAI, which will hold fast to the principle of censorship resistance. When that day comes, every one of us will have to vote with our feet and decide what kind of Web3 world we truly want. Next up, let's talk about Ripple, because this is a big one. The company's CTO David Schwartz, the legend known in the community as Joe Cats, one of the core architects of the XRP ledger, a veteran of over 13 years, has suddenly announced he's stepping down at the end of 2025. Now, he says he's not leaving completely. He'll transition to a CTO emeritus role and join the board of directors, but the timing is just incredibly delicate. When I saw this news, my stomach dropped a little. Why do I say that? Because right as he made his announcement, Swift, the traditional finance giant that Ripple has been trying to disrupt for years, made a huge splash. declaring a partnership with consensus and over 30 top-tier banks to build their own blockchain-based shared ledger. This is a direct assault on Ripple's home turf for all these years. What has been the core narrative for Ripple and XRP? We're going to replace SWIFT and offer faster, cheaper cross-border payments. Well, now SWIFT is playing the blockchain game itself and is bringing its massive network of banking allies along for the ride. So let me ask you, are those banks more likely to upgrade a system they've used for decades or take a risk on a public ledger token like XRP? The answer seems pretty obvious. So, with Schwartz choosing to step back at this critical juncture, the market is buzzing with interpretations. While many in the community are thanking him for his contributions, a significant number of early investors and influencers see this as a red flag, with some even shouting, "It's time to sell XRP." I think this highlights a very real problem. XRP's core narrative is weakening. Schwartz's departure might signal the end of Ripple's era of wild growth fueled by disruptive tech. His move to the board feels more like a strategic pivot for the company, shifting focus from pure innovation to more mature corporate governance, compliance, and possibly even preparing for an IPO. For Ripple, the company, that might be a good thing. But for those of us holding XRP, the grand story we bought into is now facing a serious test. Now for some absolutely hardcore news. The DeFi space has recently seen a landmark innovation. A Layer 1 public chain called Injective has officially launched the world's first blockchain-based pre-IPO perpetual futures market. What does that mean? It means we can now directly trade exposure to top-tier, unlisted tech giants like OpenAI, SpaceX, and Anthropic on-chain. And we can even use up to 5 times leverage to go long or short. This move has single-handedly dragged the massive $13 trillion traditional private equity market onto the blockchain. When I saw this, my first thought was that the real-world asset narrative is finally getting interesting. Before, when we talked about RWAs, we were mostly thinking about tokenizing things like real estate or bonds and just moving them on-chain. But what Injective is doing here dives straight into the deep end of financial engineering. It's not just moving assets, it's creating a brand new global secondary market on-chain for these inherently illiquid private equities. A market that supports complex trading strategies. This is where DeFi truly shines, using technology to solve liquidity problems that traditional finance hasn't been able to crack for decades. Of course, this is also where things get really spicy. This move is blatantly testing the limits of modern securities law. Think about it. Offering derivatives trading on unregistered private company securities to anonymous users worldwide is a textbook case of regulatory arbitrage. So, whether this product ultimately gets shut down by regulators or miraculously finds a path to compliance will directly determine just how high the ceiling for the entire RWA sector can be. Alright, this next piece of news is, in my opinion, incredibly significant. It could potentially change the entire rulebook for the crypto market for years to come. Over in the United States, 2 lawmakers, Representative Nick Begich from Alaska and Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, have teamed up to introduce a bill called the Bitcoin Act. You heard that right? Named after Bitcoin itself. The core idea of this bill, to put it bluntly, is to have the US government start strategically stockpiling Bitcoin, just like it does with gold. So how would it work? The bill proposes that the US government purchase a cumulative total of 1 million Bitcoins over the next 5 years. 1 million! That's no small number. And to avoid using taxpayer money, they've designed a budget-neutral plan, suggesting things like using part of the Federal Reserve's surplus or revaluing existing gold certificates to fund the purchases. The bill also mandates that all government-held Bitcoin must be kept in secure cold storage and held for a minimum of 20 years before it can be sold. When I saw this, I was genuinely stunned. You have to understand the magnitude of the narrative shift here. This means Bitcoin is officially moving beyond being an asset for individuals or companies like MicroStrategy and is now entering the highest level of strategic consideration for a sovereign nation. If this bill actually passes, the impact on the market will be structural. First, if the US takes the lead, will other countries follow? The legitimacy this would grant Bitcoin is something no ETF could ever match. Second, a consistent purchase of 200,000 Bitcoins per year would create a massive price-insensitive demand black hole in the market. This would fundamentally alter Bitcoin's supply and demand dynamics and could potentially launch us into a long-term structural bull market. Of course, there are 2 sides to every coin. Once Bitcoin becomes a pawn in the great game of nations, its idealistic, non-political halo might start to fade. In the future, Bitcoin's price, volatility, network security, and even the geographic distribution of its miners could all become focal points of geopolitical conflict. This is both a sign of its maturation and possibly the beginning of it losing some of its original charm. Now let's look at a piece of news that's really blurring the lines between CeFi and DeFi. The exchange giant Coinbase recently announced it's integrating the 1-inch swap API directly into its mobile app. This means users can now seamlessly execute on-chain trades right from their Coinbase wallet, gaining access to millions of altcoins and new tokens that were previously unavailable on Coinbase's main platform. Plus, 1-inch helps you find the most efficient trading routes, often at a better price and with lower slippage than a single DEX could offer. When I saw this news, I thought it was a brilliant move by Coinbase. Their own spot trading volume and revenue have been declining, so instead of watching users migrate to DeFi, they're essentially building the main gateway to DeFi right inside their own ecosystem. This is a part of their grand everything exchange vision, where they want you to handle all your crypto finance activities within one app. But think about it, what a huge blow this is to native wallets like MetaMask. Coinbase, with its brand recognition and a massive user base, can easily intercept that user flow, and there's a very tricky regulatory question here too. A publicly traded company, heavily regulated in the US, is now providing its users with access to all sorts of permissionless DeFi protocols globally. What happens if something goes wrong? Like if illicit funds are laundered through this channel? What's Coinbase's role then? This poses a major challenge for the SEC. So, this step by Coinbase is both a survival strategy and a bold move to accelerate into the industry's regulatory gray area. Alright, let's move on to some absolutely hardcore news. The DeFi space has just seen what I'd call a landmark innovation. A Layer 1 public chain called Injective has officially launched the world's first blockchain-based pre-IPO perpetual futures market. What does that even mean? It means that right now, we can trade exposure to top-tier, unlisted tech giants like OpenAI, SpaceX, and Anthropic directly on-chain. And get this, you can use up to 5 times leverage to go long or short. This move has single-handedly dragged the massive $13 trillion traditional private equity market right onto the blockchain. When I saw this, my first reaction was that the real-world asset narrative is finally getting interesting. Before, when we talked about RWAs, we were mostly thinking about tokenizing things like real estate or bonds and just moving them on-chain. But what Injective is doing here dives straight into the deep end of financial engineering. It's not just moving assets, it's creating a brand new global secondary market on-chain for these inherently illiquid private equities, a market that supports complex trading strategies. This is where DeFi truly flexes its muscles, using technology to solve liquidity problems that traditional finance hasn't been able to crack for decades. Of course, this is also where things get really spicy. This move is blatantly testing the limits of modern securities law. Think about it. Offering derivatives trading on unregistered private company securities to anonymous users worldwide is a textbook case of regulatory arbitrage. So, whether this product ultimately gets shut down by regulators or miraculously finds a path to compliance will directly determine just how high the ceiling for the entire RWA sector can be. And now, let's get into that ironic and contradictory situation I mentioned at the beginning. The US government shut down. The politicians in Washington couldn't agree on the budget, so they effectively shut down the federal government starting October 1st. And what happens now? Well, aside from essential services like the military and social security, many agencies like the SEC are basically closed for business, running on a skeleton crew just for emergencies. So what does this mean for us in the crypto world? The most direct impact is that the spot Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs we've all been eagerly waiting for are now facing indefinite delays in their approval process. October was seen by many as a critical window for ETF approval. But now, with the SEC practically empty, all those deadlines we were watching have become meaningless. So you see, this creates a really twisted dynamic. On one hand, it's precisely this kind of macro chaos, like a government shutdown, that drives capital into the crypto market for safety, pushing prices up. But on the other hand, this very same chaos is blocking the single biggest catalyst. Our industry has been waiting for the ETFs that could bring in a flood of mainstream capital. This perfectly illustrates crypto's dual identity right now. It wants to be formally accepted by Wall Street through regulated products like ETFs, but at the same time, its value is derived from its ability to hedge against the failures of the traditional political and financial systems. This internal conflict and tug-of-war is key to understanding the current market sentiment. In the short term, the market will likely continue to oscillate between the disappointment of ETF delays and the demand for a macro safe haven. Finally, let's look at a truly explosive phenomenon in the market today. On a day when most major coins were up, a long-forgotten sector, privacy coins, suddenly erupted. The star of the show was Zcash, ticker ZEC, which skyrocketed over 63% in 24 hours, hitting a nearly 3-year high. The strangest part, there was no specific project news behind this surge. It was purely a victory of narrative. This narrative was reignited by some of the big thinkers in our space. One of the most classic lines comes from AngelList founder Naval Ravikant, who said, "Bitcoin is insurance against fiat, and Zcash is insurance against Bitcoin." That quote just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. On-chain analysis tools are getting incredibly sophisticated. While Bitcoin's ledger is pseudonymous, in the hands of a professional, your entire transaction history can be laid bare. So, Bitcoin can hedge you against the macro risk, but it can't protect your own transaction privacy. This concern is especially relevant today, with central banks all over the world developing their own CBDCs. CBDCs are designed, in part, for total surveillance of capital flows, and that terrifies a lot of people. So an asset like Zcash, which uses zero-knowledge proofs to protect your transaction privacy, is having its value rediscovered by the market. It's being seen as the last line of defense against the risk of surveillance in our digital future. So, you can think of this Zcash rally as the market re-evaluating the fundamental need for privacy. As mainstream assets race to embrace regulation and transparency, there will always be a portion of capital seeking a true, censorship-resistant safe haven. Of course, this is also where the market risk lies. Privacy coins getting this much attention will undoubtedly draw the eye of regulators again. The crypto world of the future will likely split into two paths. One is the transparent, compliant main road, and the other is the secret garden that fiercely guards privacy. This Zcash explosion might just be the signal that this battle is heating up once again. Alright, that's all for today's Web3 Daily. If you found this helpful, please remember to hit that like button to show your support. Every day, we sift through the Web3 world to bring you the most critical information, the news that's closest to the opportunities. We hope that by breaking down these hand-picked stories, we can help you make more rational and informed decisions on your Web3 investment journey. Also, I've prepared exclusive registration links for major exchanges in the comments section below. These are special high rebate offers we've secured for our followers, and we hope they can help you save some costs on your investment path. Let's stay rational, move forward steadily, and build wealth gradually together in the Web3 world. May all of your crypto assets grow steadily. We'll see you tomorrow.